In the UK, we have a group of medium-sized cities, which is the majority of global cities, are medium-sized cities, doing interesting stuff in quite large scale. So there's the City Verve project in Manchester, which is a very big Internet of Things demonstrator project. Whole Bristol is Open initiative, in which they are doing sort of a software-defined city approach, combining data to services and business analytics in novel ways. Well, I come from Helsinki myself and led a special purpose vehicle there to develop Helsinki as a smart city. Well, that's a common model in the UK, which I think is the right one. Quite often the city administration has a tough time renewing itself from the inside, and what that requires is an intermediary which can act as the matchmaker between the different stakeholders, both inside the city and between the market and the city. So the other mechanism which I find to be a well-functioning one in the UK is the use of challenges and competitions as a way to drive these initiatives forward. The large-scale demonstrators programs I think that's quite uniquely a UK phenomena. So I haven't seen really initiatives elsewhere which are in that scale, bringing together private stakeholders, public stakeholders, and cities to join forces. In general, the UK scene is leading, especially in urban modeling and using that in planning. When we go into domains like Internet of Things, where you combine the physical and the virtual through digitalization, then we meet some of the challenges of the domain, which is that it's hard to make cities interoperable. That is maybe the showstopper at the moment, that we are still lacking standards and standardized data models for Internet of Things and for urban services. We, as the Future Cities Catapult, are, of course, that's our core job, is to bring together the academia, the cities, and the companies to solve the urban landscape so that the services can roam globally. Then there is the Hypercat initiative, which started in the UK, and now it's spread from here to Australia, which basically tackles one seemingly simple thing, which is the application protocol interfaces, APIs of cities. The real electricity in urban services is the access point to the city, and those are APIs.
There are businesses around the country that are using what we'd call smart technology to create incredibly inventive business models that we've never seen before, and they're changing the way that we shop, they're changing the way that we travel, changing the way that we socialise, all sorts. Where I think things get much more interesting is where you get a city coming together across a set of stakeholders representing business, the communities, governance, etc., and setting out a clear vision for this is what we would like, the place that where we all live, the place where we all work. This is what we would like it to be in the future. The first example I saw of this really clearly was Sunderland, going back almost 10 years or so now. They published what they called an economic master plan. It had aspirations for education, for transport, for the economy. One of the investments that the City Council made in a cloud computing platform at the time was awarded to a vendor based to a significant degree on that vendor's commitments to work with city institutions to use the cloud platform to the benefit of the wider communities and economy. For me, the core of the Smart Cities Challenge is how do you create a case to invest money in initiatives with social, economic and environmental outcomes? That's the real challenge. And there are a variety of ways of going about solving it. So one way is to tap into the venture capital and other investment that supports startup companies. So at iCentrum in Birmingham, for example, they've built an incubator targeting areas such as transportation, energy and the built environment, where startup companies are supported to develop smart city solutions. Another area is around social enterprise. If you look for a business model that finds a financially sustainable way to achieve social, environmental and economic outcomes, that's a social enterprise. So another thing is to try to figure out how can we scale up social enterprise so that they have a bigger impact. Again, in Birmingham, we work to do that through something called the Smart City Alliance, which is a non-commercial collaboration of 20 institutions in the city that could support such endeavours. A more direct way from a top-down perspective is to look at investment in physical infrastructure, in property, in road, in rail. And that's where the London Olympic Legacy Development Corporation used a really powerful lever in the award of the Eastwick and Sweetwater development, just a tiny fraction of the vast sums spent on property going into technology infrastructure to achieve social, environmental, economic outcomes in line with the Smart London plan. That's a really powerful lever as well. And then finally, and this is where we spend a lot of our time in AMI, where private companies compete to deliver services to public sector organisations, there's a tremendous opportunity for public sector to demand social, economic, environmental outcomes too. So we invest in technology that makes our services smarter because that makes us more competitive in our marketplace, but the result of that technology infrastructure is to try and reduce the number of times that the sewers overflow, or it's to provide open data to local businesses so they can create their own models, or in the cases of social services it might be to lower reoffending rates from ex-offenders. So there's a tremendous potential in that partnership between the public and private sector as well. In some ways, it's still quite early days in smart cities in terms of understanding what the scalable, repeatable, sustainable business models are. As one example that I'm quite excited by, in Staffordshire in the UK, we're responsible for maintaining the county's highways. We're also responsible for allowing everybody else who needs to do work on the highways, the utility companies, telecommunications, etc. We help to manage their plans as well. We're now using a geospatial platform to share data between 7 of those organisations so that we can plan to do works together. So there are examples of that all around the UK, and what the challenge with all of them is, especially if you want to repeat them elsewhere, is understand how was the business model made up from a mixture of financial elements and policy and governance, because all of this tends to come back in one way or another to governance.
I think when you talk about a smart city, there are 2 kinds of tangible outcome. There's the product, the places, the buildings, the infrastructure that's eventually built, but there's also the process, the ways in which decisions are taken. Architecture to date has largely been based on educated guesswork. It's not been scientific. We've had to imagine the future, but have no real objective science to show that it will actually ever happen. And as a result, we've seen a lot of failure. My company was built on the failure of seeing housing estate after housing estate fail, new town after new town not deliver the economic and social expectations of it. And then the way in which you deliver that product that works the way you planned it, where the streets are safe, where the streets flow, where the public spaces are vibrant, where the shops turn over, is through a process. And that's where the smartness has to come into processes. We need to get out of our silos and work not just together more effectively as professionals, where technology can help us plan and organize and get us in the same place at the same time, or help us conference across space when we can't all be in the same place at the same time. But it's also about taking the process out the professional world and involving a wider range of stakeholders. And that is not so much about technology, it's about attitude. It's about saying, I'm going to create these designs with the inputs of the experts who are going to end up using the streets and spaces, the everyday experts of the people in cities and the workers in buildings. I take the word smart and use it as an acronym. I find it helpful for me to remember the process, the SMART. S is about sensing. It's about gathering data, about how people behave, about air temperature, about precipitation, about the shape and scale of places. Then the M is about mapping. It's about making that data visual, because people respond to maps and they respond to visualized data rather than just spreadsheets of numbers. You can then analyze that, the A. The analysis through statistical analysis, visual analysis, discussion, talking about it. That then allows you to react. That's the R in SMART. The reaction is whether you're an architect being inspired by that data with a new idea, or a policymaker, you've seen the trends and now you can adopt the policy. And then the T is about testing your design. testing your policy before you build it. And that's been the big challenge, that we haven't in the past been able to really test our ideas without building them. You have to build a building to know how it's going to work. Well, smart technologies allow you, through predictive analytics, to test before you build. And that is a revolutionary moment in science. And through that systematic observation of cities, we've been able to generate predictive analytics at Space Syntax that allow us to forecast the future. And that will, we believe, transform planning and design. It'll bring tools and techniques to the pencils of architects and take them beyond guesswork into rigorous and robust forecasting.
One of the challenges with any smart city idea is that a lot of the obvious investment in infrastructure is relatively top down, and it's targeted at relatively large scale outcomes like economic growth for a city or improving the resilience or sustainability of an energy infrastructure. What's equally important though are how are the individual lives of ordinary citizens affected by that infrastructure. And this is where you get into an argument between top-down ideas about smart cities driven by investment in infrastructure and bottom-up ideas about smart cities driven by community vitality and small business. I think the challenge is how to mix those together. There's an architect called Kelvin Campbell who brings this together in a really, I think, inspiring way by asking the question, what are the characteristics of cities, policy and infrastructure that can give rise to massive amounts of small-scale innovation? The idea is called massive small. And I think when we get that right, we get not just large-scale intelligent infrastructure, but a place in which everybody can be successful on their own terms. Now that for me is a really smart city.